Welcome to the broadcast, my fruits. I'm feeling oh so wholesome today. I just trotted down to the market to pick up some blooms, don't you love them? And to pick up some honey from the stall and drip it onto my tongue so that I can speak in such a honey-toned voice to my husband. O-H, O-H. Yes, I'm so wholesome. Don't you love my blooms? Don't you love them? Save it. Well, before we get on to Market Meg, I just wanted to refresh the palate with a little glimpse of Her late Majesty, because I believe these photographs were taken a year ago today at the Thames Hospice in Berkshire. And isn't it a lovely reminder of the Queen's devotion to duty and to service in her very final months? And I love the photograph of those dancing, twinkling blue eyes, so alive, so vital, so blue, and that clear complexion. I think it is just so nice to look back and reflect once in a while. We miss our late Queen so very much, but we were blessed to have her for so very long, weren't we? Well, on to characters of a more rum disposition. One of those being the Duchess of Sussex, who was trotting around market. Yes, this little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed at home. I suppose it was Harry. One little piggy had roast chicken, another little piggy had none. I suppose that would be Doria, she's probably on lentils. And another little piggy went wee all the way home, didn't they? Well, she ain't coming home, Harry ain't coming home, not here to roost. Do you hear me? Home for them is Montecito, and they can stay there with their fresh flowers and their honey at the market. This was at Santa Barbara Certified Farmers Market. Actually, I think it's rather nice to see her out and about, trotting around, being free of the enclave for a few seconds. So if you might ask me, well, why bother commenting on it at all? Why are you stalking her? Let her go about her business without commentary. No, my dear, no. Why? You're forgetting about the I Want Privacy tour. Remember? The privacy tour that's been lasting the last 3 or 4 years. Chat shows, documentaries, books where they focused the lens of the whole world upon them over the last 4 years, when they wanted. You know, look at me, don't look at me, look at me, look away, how dare you? Well, we looked. They have an audience. And I'm afraid they can't pick or choose their audience. They have to like it or lump it. They're not always going to be admirers. There are going to be some who criticise as well, looking on. But you asked for the attention with your privacy tour, my dear, so you cannot complain. I do think it's sad that she doesn't get an opportunity to mosey around markets without the paparazzi lining up to take photographs of her, which I don't believe she engineers, by the way. We'll talk about that later. So she's just going to have to lump the fact that the world's lens is on her. They asked for it. They asked for it, so they can't pick and choose. And she's got her bodyguard with her anyway, hasn't she? There were rumours going round, actually, that she was going to do a Whitney and was planning to appear in some new rendition of The Bodyguard. Well, actually, this bodyguard doesn't look quite as hunky as the previous one that we saw with her. So I'm not sure if she would be quite so tempted by his security, the safety of his arms, as she might have been by the other burly, hunky guard, but who knows? And she was dragging along her pet beagle, one of the beagles, and also a large straw tote. So wholesome. So wholesome. That's why I put together such a wholesome look for you today. Actually, I look like a dinner lady. I was talking about British dinner ladies the other day. I think this was possibly some old dinner lady's pinafore. Who knows? But heck, it went with the market feel, I felt. But of course, there is always some sort of method, some sort of contrivance behind these pop-up surprise appearances, aren't there, my dears? Always. Well, my information is that it is nothing less than a deliberate attempt or effort to appeal to the everyday middle-class woman. Yes, that's what you will be seeing in the run-up to any future announcement. Now, I very, very briefly shared a whisper that I'd heard that there were gearings up for an announcement or some sort of reveal around the time of Meghan's birthday. That was my exclusive whisper, but I'm only whispering it in the slightest guff of air because her birthday is the 4th of August, by the way. And that will be a Friday when she turns 42 years old. But it was passed on from a source that I don't know personally via another friend that that was the initial target date for some sort of reveal, her birthday, but I don't personally know this source, so I'm not prepared to put my name to it, or I will over-egg that rumour, or I will end up with egg on my face. So I'm tentatively putting it out there, but with caution. And, I just wanted to mention that some sort of reveal might be upcoming. But this is why you will see these kind of appearances popping up, because it is part of the reimagining, the rebranding, and the rehabilitation process. This is a word that I have heard a lot from my whisperers and my sources. It's a rehabilitation. It's not just a rebranding, it is a rehabilitation, and it is to put Meghan's brand at the forefront of what she hopes will be her demographic, which she hopes will be the Gwynny admirers. From goop to poop. That's what it's going to be. Actually, she should have a little turd emoji to represent her royal hat that she wore on that occasion. And that can be part of the Tig's offering, can't it? Poop corner with the Duchess of Sussex. I think that would absolutely fly. She is rehabilitating her image from the Tig of yore as a lover of the food market, as a lover of the vintage fair, girl about town, dog lover, honey dripper. Do you see? She's putting it out there. And guess what? Montecito is actually the perfect set for it. And as much as we raise an eyebrow at Montecito, it's certainly no disparagement to regular Montecito residents. And actually, I've had comments going back for the past 2 years from beloved viewers who live in Montecito and tell me how wonderful and how beautiful it is. It does look very charming, I've got to say. Never been. Next time I go to California, I might have to pop by. But it makes a wonderful backdrop for her brand, or what she's hoping will be her brand. A little bit she wants to appeal to everyone, but she wants that sort of middle-class American and worldwide audience that are aspirational. This is the thing. I've told you I think she belongs more along the lines of a sort of Walmart representative, Target, perhaps doing some advertising for some very cheap and nasty makeup, or advertising hair removal services, Manscaped, this kind of thing that you see on some YouTube channels. That's the kind of thing that I would link her up with. Nothing highbrow, nothing high-end, certainly not anything approaching Dior, but that's what she wants, that's what her vision is, and she wants to get the aspirational audience in, those who can afford the kind of wares that she'll be hawking, and those that aspire to, and are willing to splash out most of their week-to-week paycheck in disposable incomes and waste it on the kind of trash that she'll be hawking. But as usual, the normal rules don't apply to Meghan Markle, because she broke the rules of the market, prohibiting dogs. No dogs allowed. And there she is, and there the beagle is. So it could be a literal goop of gloop of poop of dogs poop in the marketplace, simply because she feels she can breeze in and out and disregard the local community signage. I ask you. She wore a white unbuttoned collar shirt over a camel-coloured maxi, black flip-flops and sunglasses. She accessorised with a smug grin. So is she courting the press? I believe she is harnessing the power of the press and performing a sort of prelude, serenade for them in the run-up to her future machinations. Yes, I believe she is. In the case of Harry, for example, his courting of the press is different. When you see that look of umbrage on his face when he's being papped by the likes of Carl Larson from Back Grid, he is genuinely disturbed and angry by it because he feels stalked and under attack. But I do feel that there is a part of him that is also courting the press, while he is objecting to their presence. And yes, I clocked Mr. Larson's peculiar Instagram message where he insinuated that he was very good friends with both sides of the family. but I think anybody who reads that seriously or thinks he is alluding to a close and cosy friendship with Harry and Meghan themselves and gets invited round to the casa is extremely gullible. They certainly know and understand that the press photographers, the paparazzi, are savvy enough to locate them and snap them, especially when they are in town, in their local community. What I do not agree with is the notion that they are tipping off the paparazzi. I've never brought into that. I do not believe it to be true, and I reject that they have any kind of association with Backgrid. I reject that mainly out of common sense. Backgrid have released a statement criticising Harry in the last 2 months, and even if they hadn't, I don't believe with Harry's history that he would fraternise with the paparazzi in that way. And as for Carl Larson, there are suggestions out there that Meghan fraternises with Carl Larson. No, I don't believe that for one single second. She would never associate herself with the likes of Carl Larson. The kind of people that associate themselves with the likes of Carl Larson are the Thomas Markles of this world. And the only person that has introduced Thomas Markle to a member of the paparazzi that went on to be rather unfortunate was Samantha Markle. And glancing at these photographs, I see they were taken by a lass called Jill Ishkanian. She took the photographs for the Daily Mail. You see, because I know the form, I know when these photographs pop up, people say, oh, they arranged it, they called the photographer. Well, she is doing this for the Daily Mail. Do people really think that Meghan is in cahoots with the Daily Mail? The Daily Mail, who have had so much legal activity, who have lost to Meghan Markle in the past year and have ongoing conflicts with the Harkles. Not on your Nelly, my dear. So hopefully that might prove to some of you that these photographs, and some of them do look like she's almost aware and posing for the camera, were not at her behest. They were not at her behest. And I do want to talk about this because I'm not sure if everybody understands quite how rabid press photographers and the paparazzi can be. I mean, I know lots of you are, but some of you don't seem to understand how lucrative they are and what lengths they go to capture a shot. So no, I don't deny, and I repeatedly criticise them for courting the press and for popping up in times and places that suit them and their agenda. That is certainly something that I hold suspicion over. But actually tipping them off and dialing them up and saying, come and grab us here, come and grab us there, we'll bring you in on the gig. No, my dear. The images that are taken of Meghan in particular, but also certainly of Harry, earn the photographer and the agencies several salaries for 10 minutes work, several annual salaries most likely. They earn so much money. Meghan and Harry are at the top of the pile for what the press want, for headlines, for photographs. They are at the top of the pile. It might be a pile of turd, but it's a pile nevertheless, my dear. And paparazzi do communicate with each other. They track celebrities legally, sometimes perhaps here and there not so legally, but for the purpose of what we're talking about, legally, there are ways. And with their own forms of intelligence between each other. And people say, and people said during the parade 4th of July, that people cannot use images of celebrity children under California law, that they require parental consent. That was one of the things that was said when Lily was photographed. Well, I'm going to apologise in advance if the information I'm about to tell you is outdated in any way or not relevant. This is just from my own digging around on the internet. I'm not going to look at anything else because it ends up frustrating me. There are too many conspiracy theorists out there who look for the worst possible scenario. But I will flash up the 2013 amendment to section 11414 of the Penal Code that relates to harassment in California, the children of celebrities or known figures that I found. I do apologise if this is out of date or not relevant. This is just from my personal digging around. But it says that any person who intentionally harasses the child or ward because of that person's employment shall be punished by a year in jail or $10,000 maximum fine, or both of those things. They're the punishments. And I'm redacting what's being flashed on the screen here, but it says harassment, though, is defined as directed at a specific child that seriously alarms, annoys, torments, or terrorizes the child. Conduct must be such as would cause a reasonable child to suffer emotional distress and actually cause the victim to suffer substantial emotional distress. So it seems that taking photographs of Prince Harry, who happens to have his daughter in arms at a public parade on the 4th of July, isn't breaking that penal code. And if Harry were to make some kind of claim or sue the photographer, in this instance, with regards to this penal code, then it wouldn't hold any water, really, because it's quite clear that Harry wasn't prevented from going about his normal business and that Lilibet was not seriously alarmed or annoyed or tormented or terrorized. So it protects these children to a certain extent, but it, from what I've read, does not prevent a photographer from capturing an image. And as you know, that image was blurred in certain territories. Anyway, so I'm bringing that up for all the people that say that Harry and Meghan must have signed off a consent form to Carl Larson and Back Grid, a consent for them to photograph Lilibet. Well, whether or not the penal code was broken, or whether it wasn't, or whether what I've read out is sophistry and outdated, no, I will never believe that Prince Harry or Meghan Markle would do such a thing. But what I've just read out to you seems to back up the idea that the photographer would have had to be much more terrorizing and tormenting and sinister in his behaviour in order for there to be a claim made against either he or Back Grid. I did a couple of minutes Googling. I wouldn't really call it private investigating, but I Googled this photographer, this Jill Ishkanian, and a quick Google threw up all kinds of drama that she's been involved in, my dear. As I said, on this occasion, she is working for the Daily Mail, and she has worked for the Daily Mail in the past. And I found an interesting article on a website called The Ringer about the life of the paparazzi, which mentioned her and I think interviewed her a little bit. And if this is at first glance, I'm presuming it's the same Jill, and I'm only quoting from the article. I'm not asserting any fact. I don't know anything about the woman. But this article says that paparazzi were often miles ahead of the magazine's best reporters as far as knowing what was going on in the entertainment world. This may be a good place to mention that being a paparazzo is a batshit crazy job that requires people to have some kind of chip missing in order to do it. You need a certain fearlessness and probably a serious case of I don't give a shititis. You are not cowed by famous people or awkward situations. You think nothing of hovering over a stranger's wedding. You probably have, let's call it, a fluid sense of ethics. And then the article goes on to say that this Jill worked at US Weekly. Sorry, it's Us Weekly, isn't it? I've always called it US Weekly, but I realised lately that it's apparently Us Weekly. And she worked as a West Coast editor. And that all ended in spectacular fashion. There was a lot of drama, and she left to start her own paparazzi agency because Us Weekly staff had accused her of hacking into their emails for tips. And the FBI raided her home. That is dramatic, isn't it? And her agency. She was never arrested or charged. But she sued the magazine and she sued the West Coast bureau chief for $55 million. Well, ultimately, that was all thrown out and it was all dismissed. And she went out of business and she started working on her own as a pap. And she generated quite a bit of press when she called the cops on Heather Locklear. Lovely, charming Heather Locklear. I've got to say, I wish her the very best. She, from what I understand and what I see online, is going through a very tough time mentally. But I also happen to know that she is a really, really lovely woman who has just undergone some disturbances of the mind and through alcoholism, this kind of thing, and addictions. But I love Heather Locklear. Anyway, I digress, but this photographer, this Jill, she generated press when she called up the cops over Heather Locklear driving erratically, and then she photographed the incident and made $27,000 from it. So, do you see, I'm trying to go to pains to read this out just for some of you who might not understand how much money is at stake, because Heather Locklear is a lot more of a minor star these days, sadly, than Meghan Markle. Actually, cross that out, I take that back. She is certainly not a star. She is a celebrity. She is a trashy celebrity. So, tick off that. You know what I mean, though. It's because I had Heather Locklear in mind, and she is a star. She is a star. But she's a more minor star on the world stage at this moment in time than that trashy celebrity Meghan Markle. So, if Heather Locklear, some minor incident for her, can sell for 27 grand, which isn't bad for an hour's work, and then photographing her 27 grand for this photographer. Imagine what these photographers can make for a round of photographs a day with Meghan Markle at the market, all this, that and the fourth, where everybody's fighting to get a shot of her. The article goes on to say that being a paparazzo isn't all crazy action. In fact, a lot of the work is pure boredom. You just sit in cars, really having nowhere to go to the bathroom and waiting for someone to come out so you can shoot your shot. And yes, that's when you really do become a stalker of kind. And I think it does take a certain kind of character, and some of them are very much off kilter. And I'm not going to point to Carl Larson particularly at this moment in time, but you can do your own calculations and make your own estimations there. But it also tells of the O.J. Simpson story and the drama around that, when a paparazzo was hired to stake out the cemetery where, I suppose, I didn't write it down, but I suppose where Nicole, the wife, was buried, and a paparazzo was hired to spend 14 to 16 hours a day just waiting to see if O.J. Simpson would come along. And eventually he did. A month later, he came, they got their shot, and they made oodles of money from selling the pictures, which became a timeless paparazzi shot. Money was made. Okay, questions and comments. One here from Jodie Fritz. Thank you from Chelsea, Manhattan, NYC. As Joe Franklin's widow, I am Jodie Fritz. I know that Joe is loving you and your show right along with me. He knew what entertainment is all about. Bless you, River. You are a beautiful vision and talent. Thank you, Jodie Fritz. That's very kind of you to say so. I appreciate it. I appreciate you dropping by. Jodie Fritz was the partner of Joe Franklin for 21 years, I believe. And she was also the stand-in for Gwyneth Paltrow in A Perfect Murder. And you might recall, but a viewer, one of you, suggested watching Gwyneth, because I was defending Gwyneth. I was one of the rare defenders. Before then, everybody started defending her a couple of weeks later in that trial, and realising that she was up against a Fruit Loop. But I, as usual, was the first one to offer a point of reason, and defended her. Well, Jodie, our viewer, was Gwyneth Paltrow's stand-in and her double on A Perfect Murder. One of you suggested I watch that movie. I really liked the movie. I watched it, so that was thanks to you, one of my basketeers, and it's wonderful to know that Jodie Fritz is one of our basketeers. She is and was a model, a successful model, a fine artist. So it's always interesting to hear from all my viewers, whether sung or unsung. And you're not the first widow, if I may use that word. I think, did you use it yourself? I think you did. I'm not sure if you were married to Joe Franklin, but you were certainly his partner. I did a bit of Googling. You are not the first female partner of a departed celebrity to knock on the fruity door. One that comes to mind is the wife of one of the Bay City Rollers, who were big here in the kingdom. Perhaps it was the 1960s or 70s maybe, I'm not quite sure. But they were big here, the Bay City Rollers. I'm not sure if they were known abroad, but they were very big here, teen sensations. And I won't name which member it was, but a widow is here among the Basketeers as well. And I get all kinds of comments and messages from some very well-known household names, most of which I'm too discreet to mention to you, but it's exciting. And if you are a celebrity or someone in the know that I should know about, please do tell, because I keep it all to myself. I really do, unless you give me permission to share with the Basketeers. Do tell me, but don't think you can pull one on me and pretend to be someone you're not, because I ignore it unless I can verify it and double check it. And I didn't know much about your late husband, dear Joe Franklin. I was familiar with the name, though. It's one of those names you hear, but you know, it was a little before my time, dear. And of course, in America, we didn't have Joe Franklin here. But the name rang a bell. I did some Googling, and he, as I'm sure many of you will know, was the American host of radio and TV. And he was very charming. I looked him up on YouTube, and I was looking back in his younger days. And yes, I can see why you were drawn to him, my dear. He seemed like he had a dose of charm, didn't he? And he interviewed all the greats, all the greats. Some do say that he laid it on a bit thick with some of his showbiz stories, but I mean, I saw with my own eyes interviewing Bing Crosby. He was associated with Marilyn Monroe, Elvis, Judy Garland he interviewed. My ultimate favourite. John F. Kennedy. Andy Warhol. Yes, it went all the way through to the Warhol period. The Ramones. President Nixon. Richard Pryor, my favourite male comedian of all time. Well, Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, perhaps. Yes, so very established. And it was nice to hear about him. And the reason I'm mentioning him is because when I was Googling him, as it does, you go down little wormholes, don't you? Well, something that came up under his name, although he might not have appreciated it, my dear, was a documentary called The Aristocrats. I'm going to pronounce it your American way. In the kingdom, it's Aristocrats, with the emphasis on the first syllable. But abroad, you say Aristocrats. So I will pay homage to that. The Aristocrats, the documentary from 2005. It brought me along to that because his name was mentioned within it. Now, it happened to be mentioned in a rather crude joke by Sarah Silverman, and I hear that he wasn't happy with it being used, so I don't wish to offend you, Jodie Fritz. I know there was some friction over this, but it was a very interesting documentary about a famous joke that I wasn't aware of. It's supposed to be the filthiest joke in the world. It's known as the Aristocrats joke. And if you want to watch this documentary, I just Googled The Aristocrats 2005. And I think 3 or 4 down on Google. It's shown for free on a website. You can watch it. And I really enjoyed it, actually. It tickled me if you've got an idle hour or two. And it starts off telling you what the joke is after an introduction, and you feel rather nonplussed about it, and there's not really a punchline. You think, this is the comedian's joke. That all comedians worldwide over the last few decades, it's infamous, it's notorious, but it leaves you rather nonplussed at first. You think, what is this? By the 17th minute, I was laughing my head off, because it's almost like they bring you into the atmosphere of a private joke between friends, and it is the kind of joke that is reiterated by every comedian on the circuit, or at least was, and every comedian brings their own style to it, and it can be improvised and amended to your own taste. It involves a family, I believe a husband and wife, and a grandma and a son and a daughter and a dog. It involves a family. And they rock up at a vaudevillian talent agent's, and he asks them what the act is, and they proceed to tell him. Now, because of the YouTube community guidelines and to protect some of you from the truly indecent, I will not go into what the act was featuring this family, this very close-knit family. But suffice to say, the joke is supposed to be told, and it can be told over 2 minutes, 30 seconds, or 3 hours. I believe the record was perhaps 2.5 hours, something like this. It can go on and on and on as the final segment of a comedy act or as an entire comedy act. But you throw every possible disgusting putrid, filthy, obscene, offensive item into this scenario involving the family that perform on stage. The mother, the father, the son, the daughter, the granny and the dog. And it involves them, it involves what they do with each other, and it involves what they excrete from their bodies, or liquid that emerges from their bodies. Various scenarios, which I will not venture into, but you can use your imagination. It is about the imagination of the comic. It is about pushing every limit, every boundary that you could ever wish or not wish to do. And it's not for the faint-hearted. The reason I mention it is because watching it, it harks back to bygone eras where everything was off limit. You could joke about every creed, every colour, every race, every religion without fear or favour. Of course, a few people are always going to be offended or get their knickers in a twist, but there wasn't the social media tribes, there wasn't the internet so that people could form mobs to drag them down, and people either found it funny or didn't, and if you didn't, you got on with your life. And if you were offended, well, you might have caused a bit of a scene locally, but you weren't cancelling comedians so that they can't laugh about anything at all. It was a wonderful reminder of the freedom, and even though the joke might be shocking to some people, I'm not a fan of shock jock comedy or being vulgar for vulgarity's sake. That's not fun to me. It's not witty, and that's why it depends so much on the comedian. And in this documentary there is a roster of many, I think 100 comedians they interview, which interspiced into the documentary, and they all give a flavour of how they adapt the joke to them, and some will make you laugh, some won't, but it certainly gave me a good chuckle here or there. And there's something powerful, even if initially you're clutching your pearls. How could they? Oh, it's terrible, especially in the temperature of today's society. When it comes to relentlessly over an hour and a half, and it gets worse and worse, and each joke gets cruder and cruder, and they push the boundaries of what this family do on stage. They push it further and further. There is just this absurd sense of ridiculous that comes into it, and you realise how healthy it is to be able to laugh at absolutely everything, no matter how seemingly offensive. And I do mean everything off limits. There is something freeing about sharing the stupidity of it, and one can imagine watching it in an intimate, cabaret theatre at the end of the night, watching a one-man show, and just absorbing yourself in the ridiculous hilarity of it, creasing up with laughter at the absolute disgustingness of humanity. Late blooming frontal lobe. I do love some of these names. Late blooming frontal lobe. River, my lovely flute, I would like to know your thoughts about when Charles may step down and let William be king. Love you and your content. Thank you, my dear. I think we've broached or touched upon this subject before, but royalty do not step down. Royalty do not step down. With rare exception, there have been 4 abdications in British history. Edward VIII being the last one, the late Queen's uncle. He was the last abdicator. There was also Richard II. There was Mary, Queen of Scots. And there was James II of England, who was James VII of Scotland. So it is a job for life, unless the monarch becomes incapacitated, when there would then be a regency, and Prince Charles, as he was stepping into a soft regency in the last year of Her late Majesty's life. He was filling in for her at certain events and on certain state occasions. So he had entered into a soft regency, but not an official regency, and it didn't mean that she had abdicated in any way or anything close. As we know, she was greeting new prime ministers a couple of days before her death. So it is a job for life, and it is one of the things that makes me proud of our heads of state, as you know. His Majesty is as devoted to service and duty as the late Queen. Every inch as devoted as she was. It runs through his blood. He has already dedicated the best part of 75 years, the best part of a lifetime, to service and duty. before he was monarch, and he will continue to do so until he is unable or until he dies, the likelihood being when he dies. But I will say the difference with Charles is that he is not in as fine fettle as her late Majesty. She declined and deteriorated over the last year or two. But she was wonderful, wasn't she? In the late winter season, she was wonderful in her early 90s. Charles, as we know from Harry, suffers with a lot of pain. He has mobility issues. You can see his gait. It wears him out, although he remains as energetic as he possibly can be. You wouldn't know that he's suffering constantly, which he is. Same with our Queen. But he's weather-worn, not just from the pressures of daily life, but also from his sporting life. Polo injuries that he carries with him, many of them. But as for letting William take over, I'm not sure that I would concur with that kind of language. It isn't as if William is queuing up, eager to take on the role. I'm sure he would be glad of as many years free of that very heavy burden of responsibility. They are not champing at the bit to take the reins, if I may use a pun, to take the rein. William is already under pressure to prove himself as a sterling Prince of Wales. And he's not wasting a moment of that. But he needs to enjoy that life and that family life before that dreadful responsibility becomes his. It's not just a joyous responsibility, it is also an awesome and dreadful responsibility to be head of state of several countries, many, all these realms, as well as the kingdom, and possibly head up the Commonwealth as well. It is a dreadful responsibility and burden, a serious one. So it's not about letting William come into the fold and have his time. I appreciate the lifelong role. It's one of the reasons that I am grateful to our monarchs for dedicating their lives to our service, and puffed up politicians from all around the world, including in this country, come and go. They come and go. They're ephemeral. They can lord it around as if they are the thing, but that is it. They are the thing of the moment. And prime ministers, for example, King Charles is already on his second prime minister and he's not even a year in, and he would have been on his third prime minister had the late Queen died just a couple of days before she did. He would have been on his third prime minister within his first 6 months. So they come and go, my dear, but monarchy remains. They play the long game. I can't for the life of me see him stepping down to let William in, with all due respect. I can't see that happening. Whether or not Charles will lead as long a life as his late mother remains to be seen. That is the unknown. That is the great mystery of life. When that moment would be, could be today. The moment that last breath leaves his ruddy mouth, that is the moment when the Prince of Wales, our beloved Big Willie, accedes to the throne of the United Kingdom and all her realms and becomes King William, His Majesty, King William the Fifth, with his delectable Queen at his side, Queen Catherine, consort of the United Kingdom. Yes, King William and Queen Catherine, they are on the way, so haters, so monarchy abolitionists. Oh, you have your fun with your neon placards, my dear. Not my king, not my king. Well, he is your king, lovers. He is your king, whether you like it or not. And guess what? With Big Willie and the balls behind Big Willie, our dear Catherine on the way. They ain't going anywhere, love. The kingdom are falling in love with them. They've even fallen in love with Queen Camilla. Queen Camilla we're talking about. People adore the woman. Yes, the most reviled Rottweiler in history, so they called her. That is the magic effect of royalty. And if you seriously think that these generations coming up are going to cast aside and cast asunder Catherine, you think they're going to cast her aside? She was out doing our bidding today at Wimbledon, issuing trophies. I think it was Czechoslovakia that won, wasn't it? The Czech girl. We'll look at that in the next broadcast. But she was out there today. And she even beat Meghan Market girl, in the headlines. Not that she needs to try. But yes, she took front billing of the front page today over that Market gal, because the kingdom simply couldn't ask for a better queen. A queen, and that is something that Meghan Market will never be. Never be. And we will never have a King Henry the Ginger. We will never have a Todger King. No, we won't. Isn't that cold comfort for you, my dears? It's cold comfort. Well, I'm going to go and arrange my blooms and bake some cookies. And I'm going to add some honey to the tea. Have my English tea. So smug, because I just love my Montecito life. And I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast, my fruits. Thank you for joining me on this happy Saturday. Leave me a juicy comment if you would like to. And if you happen to visit my tip jar in the description box, then I thank you most sincerely. I really do. Take care, my dears, and toodle pip.